folks, welcome back. This is 93.1 and the Mighty 1190. I'm Shane. Archie's right here with me. We got Congressman Dan Bishop on the phone with us. And normally he's always been nice enough to come and be with us in studio. I've always appreciated that about him, but he's actually in Washington. Archie said he was at his day job. How you doing, Dan?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm up here in Crazy Town, and we're working hard. There's always something going on. We've got a Homeland Security Committee meeting starting in a couple minutes here, and we got that, so it's set up to pound on the FEMA director a little bit, but we'll be there to see if we can bring some light to the hearing.
Congressman, want to ask you, there just seems to be now some talk in the early stages about another stimulus. What can you tell us about that?
It's still a little unclear, Archie, what we're going to see. We anticipate, I've heard of late that the bill may be $1 trillion and a half.
Yeah.
We start tossing these numbers around, they begin to look small at $1.5 trillion after the really $9 trillion that's been expended in terms of the Federal Reserve's efforts and the CARES Act. You've heard a good bit about.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure exactly what's going to come forward. There's some important questions. I will say that the CARES Act I voted for has provided the Paycheck Protection Program loans. You've heard about the forgivable loans to small businesses. I think that's had a good impact in sustaining a lot of small businesses through the worst of the pandemic.
It certainly has.
And I think there may be room here, Archie, for some additional help for the businesses that have been hit the worst, that have suffered the 70-80% revenue losses, in order to give them some working capital to get back underway. But it should be a much smaller effort, and I'm very concerned. I mean, I've been concerned all along about the amounts we're adding to our nation's debt. That's a tremendous worry. I think it'll bite us badly in times to come. But for the moment, we got to get the economy back up and running.
Well, yeah, it's a two-edged sword. I mean, at some point, we're adding, literally trillions of dollars to our deficit, and you got to wonder where that's going to play out in the end. Can we expect the tax increases to cover that? But in the meantime, it's been a license to print money. But now that, most of that has gone by the wayside, and the Paycheck Protection Program loans, most of the people, that money's been spent. Evictions are now, there was some protection against evictions, and now that legislation is come and gone, so people are worried about that. Of course, here in North Carolina, with our governor keeping us in phase 2, and we don't know what school is going to look like. It's different for different areas, and virtual learning. Parents, working families, single parents. They got to work. They got to pay their mortgage, car payment, power bill. I mean, you got to work. So, there's going to be a lot of latchkey kids that are home alone during the day trying to virtual learn. We're going to school one day a week and virtual the rest, and the parent has to work. And so the kid's home alone trying to virtual learn. It's just not a good. I don't know. There are a lot of people upset about it. We're going to talk to our local superintendent tomorrow to try to get a better understanding. But anyway, for some of these folks, this this stimulus money is gone, and we're no better. We're still in phase 2.
I think you're right, Archie. And we've had the conversation sort of along these lines before, but I've always been on the perspective that. This is something that we have to contend with, but you can't just hunker down and put everybody on ice for a year, 18 months. Some people say long. I mean, that won't work.
Yeah.
So if everything we've done in terms of the PPP and the idea that during the worst of this, we're going to provide a period to support enterprises through the shutdowns, but then you've got to get back to work. And you got to get back to school. The idea that the governor's plans on school, where it's bad enough if students missed March, April, May last year, early June, that had an impact, and all the evidence is that they're not getting substantial benefits from watching Zoom calls of their classes. And now we're going to have that substantially going forward, indefinitely for the entire first semester, perhaps? When is the logical turning point? And if you look at the numbers, yes, the cases have continued to increase, but, just taking Mecklenburg County, I just happened to have looked at details all along. The officials there were projecting 5,000 COVID patients in the hospitals, 3,000, 1,500, all these erratic numbers. Well, they've turned out to be 180 at the peak. So, and remember, that's what the idea always was, is not that you could somehow magically stop COVID, but that you would flatten the curve so that we wouldn't overwhelm resources. But from that point forward, people are going to have to exercise good common sense, use that to avoid getting sick, avoid passing it to others, stay home if you're sick, and so forth.
Don't we at some point, Congressman? Don't we have to? What worries me about it is when you hear governors talking about it, because depending on which state they're in, they're handling this thing. Like the governor of South Carolina is handling this very differently than the governor of North Carolina. He's saying, we're opening schools September 8th because kids need to go to school. Where North Carolina's, it always worries me because what's the magic number? Like, in other words, at what point does it become acceptable? Because right now the goalpost just keeps moving. It's like you said, we need to flatten the curve. We need to not overrun our hospitals. Well, we accomplished that. So now it's turned into, well, we need to not spread it at school. So somebody needs to come up with a magic number. When we hit this point, can we open back up and everything go back to normal?
Well, Sean, I think that tells you everything you need to know. They are moving the goalposts. And what does that point to? It points to a crisis response that has been politicized to exploit people's fears.
Now, Emory...
Rather than one designed to solve a problem which has been specifically identified. Even Dr. Fauci, you guys were making reference to the celebrated Dr. Fauci, he's been all over the map.
Well, Emory's here, and Emory's got a theory. Emory, you've never got to say this, but Emory says he knows what this is all about. I want to see what Dan thinks about this.
What the one concern I have is I'm concerned that this is a push to make sure that there are no elections in person. That's something that concerns me, that they're going to go to mail-in ballots or email ballots.
So I'm glad you brought that up, Emory. You may not be aware of this. On Friday, the North Carolina State Elections Director entered an emergency order in which basically she multiplied dramatically the number of early voting sites. And by the way it'll work out, that'll effect will be mostly in the heavily urban areas. In some ways, it's not the worst thing to do, except you got to know what she's done. Back in May, a governmental body in the state called the Rules Review Commission said that the elections director didn't have emergency powers in this situation. That's reserved for natural disasters like a tornado or a hurricane or something like that. But they didn't contest that decision by the Rules Review Commission at the Elections Board. They just waited 2 months, and then she entered this emergency order in the dark of night on Friday. And the concern that I have, to Emory's point, is what is she going to do as the election gets closer, when nobody has an opportunity to get into a court and try to straighten it out?
Yeah,
it's not the way the railroad's supposed to run, and I'm watching it very carefully, Emory, and people are going to have to be prepared to get in there and fight to stop that kind of unilateral. It's exactly the kind of thing the governor has done. He's exercised powers that, as you all know, are very questionable, whether he's supposed to have the consent and agreement of the Council of State to do the things he's done. He just bowls on through. And so far, we haven't seen anybody step to the front to stop him. And same thing here, Emory, on the elections. I think that's a big question. What will they do at the last minute?
Congressman Dan Bishop joins us from Washington. Congressman, you introduced the No Reward for Inciting Organized Turmoil Act of 2020, or the No Riot Act, with a couple other representatives. Explain what that is, please.
Archie, I think that people out there, one of the things I hear most often is people want to see us fighting for them, for their protection in the midst of the rioting, the arson, the looting, and now as people talking about defunding police, and you see the chaos emerging in city after city, the No Riot Act adds penalties for those who, in the court, conducting riots that involve interstate travel or coordination by means of interstate communication like social media. If you do that and you injure or kill a federal, state, or local officer in the course of that, my law or my bill would criminalize that, would make that a criminal act under federal law and impose harsh penalties. And it's the second piece of legislation that I've introduced just in the last couple of weeks addressing this particular development across the country. The other one's called the Chopping Cash for Chaz Act, honoring, speaking from the autonomous zone in Seattle, remember the name of that. And that one says that if local officials, which has been the huge problem, local officials across the country are derelict in their responsibility to protect people, and they've incited, they've encouraged these zones to exist. You see now the unrest in Portland after the Seattle example, and there have been some other attempts, but it would cut off federal assistance to those cities until they take actions to dissolve or to disband that kind of autonomous anarchy zone and explain to the Department of Justice how they're going to prevent a recurrence. Now, those are both two bills that have been filed. Some co-sponsors, so far not a lot of Democrats, but I think even Democrats need to be afforded an opportunity to choose and to say whether they support anarchy or they support order and the protection of the people.
Well, there's been 53 nights in a row of this going on in Portland. They have stormed the federal courthouse. They have set fires in front of it. They have done things that just plain, and you've got the mayor of Portland saying he doesn't appreciate federal troops coming in and threatening his city, and this has been all over the news. The plain and simple truth of it is we're a nation of laws, and if we're going to be a civil nation, you have to have laws. And if it's a federal building, like in this instance, they're arguing about whether or not the president has the right to send. He absolutely has the right. I mean, it's a federal building, is to be protected. And is that not true?
I think that's exactly right, Sean. In fact, every level of government has the obligation to maintain order, to protect people's safety, to protect their property. What you've seen is Democrat after Democrat, frankly, the most lunatic left ones among them, who have abandoned that responsibility. And so what the president does have is the responsibility at least to protect federal installations and buildings in those locations. And that's all in the world that they have done. And I've seen, you've seen some of the craziest accusations against federal officers. I've seen in every case those have been completely rebutted. Ken Cuccinelli's acting deputy secretary at Homeland Security has done a great job of that. It's a bunch of bunk. But this is what the president has essentially said is he's going to take the steps necessary to protect people within the scope of his duty. Now, in certain circumstances, that could get broader than what he's doing. But I wholeheartedly endorse the idea that federal officers are not going to surrender federal courthouses and other federal property in these cities. And by the same token, if I can get my legislation to move, North Carolina taxpayers should not be subsidizing those lunatics that are operating those on the left coast.
You also had, and I'll mention this because this is something that personally affected me, but you've got the Farmers Act of 2020 helping expand assistance, and we, as a cattle farmer, I took advantage of of that, and it actually helped me a lot because there was money there. The cattle market went in the toilet, frankly, over the last 3 months, and there was money there to help cattle farmers recoup some of the money they lost from either selling or not being able to sell cattle. So that personally helped me, and I know it helped a lot of other people. And I'm glad that you folks are trying to make sure that those resources are still there. I just on a personal level appreciate that.
Well, Sean, I'm glad to know that. And I've been, in general, we've had a number of steps taken once they did the PPP. Government always sets things up. One thing about the PPP that worked well is that it moved money really fast using the private sector to lending institutions to get it out there. And I've been in favor of every step we've taken to add more flexibility to how businesses can use that. And so my legislation on letting farmers use it for example, equipment rent. The farmers have the hardest task of anybody on the earth, I think, in terms of your capital investment and all the risks that you face, and to have an artificial sort of a barrier there in terms of whether you could spend that on equipment rent, something that is another thing that could be corrected readily, and so that's what we've done.
Yeah.
But I do think in most cases, to get the money out there, let small business people make their own judgments about the best way to use the money. Things will work out the best. So making the best of a bad situation, and I appreciate the burdens that you face, you and other farmers, Sean.
Congressman, I want to ask you, you helped secure a $27 million contract for Wake Forest and Atrium for a COVID-19 study. Can you explain that a little bit to us?
Yeah, thank you for asking, Archie. One of the things that became clear as this COVID thing developed, we saw reports and heard rumors about it sort of on Twitter before you ever got a hint of it in media, but that COVID infections were running far higher than the official number of cases showed. You'd see these serologic tests done afterward, after an infection that would show the antibodies in somebody. Well, there was a great study that was commenced by some researchers at Wake Forest Baptist and involved in Atrium Health and a number of other systems, and it was looking to grow. The General Assembly leadership provided some significant seed money to that, and as that was rolling out, they then were forming alliances with medical systems in the Mississippi Delta and in Maryland and other places across the country, needed additional funding. And I just put the shoulder to the wheel and got some help from Senator Tillis and Steve Scalise from Louisiana and Senator Cassidy from down there. And we pushed hard on CDC to get their attention on that, because they've been appropriated a tremendous amount of money to do exactly this, get testing out that will help get a better idea of what we're facing so that we can manage COVID better. So we were successful in doing that, and sometimes it just proves that up here, if members will buckle down and work something relentlessly, you can get it through a bureaucracy even when they're overwhelmed. So I was proud of that, and I'm pleased that this groundbreaking research is being headquartered from North Carolina.
That's true. Before we let you go, I want to ask you, for North Carolinians that are still looking for resources, do you have some information about where they can find them?
I do, and Archie, I'm always delighted for anybody to be in touch with my office from North Carolina. They can go to my website and they can find information. It's danbishop.house.gov, and they can call my office in Washington or they're Monroe, but the Washington number is 202-225-1976.
Well, I want you
give me that email address again.
danbishop.house.gov. That's the website address.
Okay.
I want you to do one thing for me, Dan, because I'm not a politician. I don't have to play by the same rules y'all do. We're just radio hosts. So do me a favor. Do you ever get a chance? Do you run across ever get a chance to see President Trump, talk to him?
I do. One of the things that somebody told me who was pretty close to him early on is call him. He'll take your call. And I've done it several times. I try not to abuse the privilege.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can get President Trump on the phone. He's a very unusual fellow in that way.
Well, I want you to
the imperial presidency about him.
I want you to do me a favor, and all I ask is that you tell him Shane from Wixie had this idea. Call him up and tell him, Mr. Trump, President Trump, call every state in the United States, some local company that's making these face masks, and send every registered Republican in the United States a face mask that either says Trump Pence 2020 or Make America Great Again, and you will see this crap stop. And and it'll support local economies. It'll help states. It'll help workers in states. It won't cost the Republicans much money, and I promise you, two things will happen. First off, you'll get Republicans to wear the mask because we're the ones that don't think we should be forced to do so. And second, you'll stop seeing masks on television because there's a 50% chance it's going to say Trump on it.
Shane, you got it figured out, my friend.
Give me his number. I'll call him. Hey, I appreciate it, Dan.
I can see the look on his face when I tell him that. I'm going to get at it.
Yeah. Thank you very much for
Thank
the
you,
time.
Congressman. Appreciate it.
Archie, y'all take care.
We'll
You
see
too.
Yeah, I don't see why somebody just play the game the same way the Democrats
That's
play.
right.
Just
Yeah.
and you can order these masks already, but they're
That's right.
$15.